Hiya! Welcome to this, my 44th episode of VideoFuzzy. I'm your host, Terry J. Aman, and in this installment, titled A Million Gallons of Schmaltz, I encountered a significant third season episode of Boston Legal, comments on A Million Little Things and I Am the Night in my current collection, and in old business, burning a couple of homemade DVD sets makes me rethink my stance on Legion. Welcome to the show.
He doesn't have that on video, does he? We'll find out together on VideoFuzzy.
Writing this one from home this time. For my birthday, North Dakota has dumped a couple feet of snow on our region in less than a week, and I'm more or less resigned to being homebound. Took the day off, spent it clicking around listening to R.E.M's Bittersweet Me, She Just Wants to Be, a few other favorites, brewed some coffee and put together a few reactions. It's weird. I got further in my classic collection, but I've actually got more to say about my current collection this time. Not to mention a homeburn project I completed last weekend. For now, correction. Error. I've got another correction to make from episode 42, Life, This Podcast, and Everything. No big, but the parade in the pilot episode of Deadly Class was the Dia de los Muertos parade, not Mardi Gras. Maria Gabriela's de Faria's Katrina face painting in that scene should really have been a top clue for me, but I goofed. Neither celebration coincides with the beginning of your standard school term, but I thought it did get the production off to a cool, visually exciting start. Also, I've got a long-standing Doctor Who error to correct. File it under shows that have been running for longer than I've been alive. Anthony Ainsley was not the first actor to portray the Master, as I've asserted repeatedly in this project. The character first appeared in the 8th season of Doctor Who in The Terror of the Autons during 3rd Doctor Don Pertwee's run. He was portrayed by Roger Delgado, and according to the TARDIS Data Core fan wiki, has been presented by at least 10 other actors during the run of the series. My direct experience with this character only goes back to his possession of Tremas, the Keeper of Traken, in 1981 against Tom Baker's Doctor. My bad. Learning things is fun, as he were. Finally, cleaning up a mess I first identified back in episode 32. Last weekend I was able to go back in and correct the bad season and episode numbers I had for my We Bear Bears listings. No big deal, just wanted the information in my catalog listing and blog to be right. I just hadn't had a chance up till now, but oh wow, I had taken the lion's share of my cataloging info from what was posted at IMDb, and guys, seriously, I had to go through and renumber more than 50 catalog entries. Nice sense of accomplishment here, but dudes, IMDb, clean your house.
Friday Night Feature.
On disc 645, I found Fine Young Cannibal, the 4th episode in season 3 of Boston Legal. I know. I just featured Boston Legal in episode 40, Familiar Arguments, a 4th season installment titled Indecent Proposals. My reasoning behind following that one up so closely with this 3rd season production has a lot to do with, well, lots of different things. The story of this episode itself is admittedly a bit limited. We're at the point in this character arc where James Spader as Alan Shore is angling to bed Candice Bergen as Crane Poole and Schmidt partner Shirley Schmidt, and ex-lover of his best friend Denny Crane, played by William Shatner. Shirley doesn't want any misunderstanding between them, and Denny forbids the canoodling, so Alan challenges Denny to a wrestling match, and how is this a law firm? Wrapping this up right now, Alan loses. There's lots of ridiculous surrounding this plot point. You can track it all down on your own. Larger issues worth touching on. HMOs at this juncture, we're talking fall of 2006, HMOs are sending patients overseas for complicated and expensive cardiac surgery, and patients don't have a say in it. So that's a case Denny, Mark Valley as Brad Chase, and Denny's one-time blind date, attorney Bethany Horowitz, played by Meredith Eaton Gilden, are pursuing. In the title case, Alan and Shirley defend a homeless man accused of cannibalism when his friend had asked him to cremate him, and he was hungry. That one got a little bit Monty Python for me. Fans of the show will correctly assume both teams win their cases. The HMO, because the notoriety from the case will be worse than the settlement they have to pay, and in the cannibalism case, Alan was able to convince the jury that the prosecutor was just trying the case as a publicity stunt, and probably starving homeless people have it bad enough as it is. Then, out of his own pocket, Alan gave him enough money to put his life back together. In the broader season-length story arc, Julie Bowen and Craig Bierko as attorneys Denise Bauer and Jeffrey Coho, they're making inquiries on behalf of their client, Ashton Holmes as Scott Little, who'd been pursuing an affair with the judge's wife, herself a judge, Marcia Hooper, who had been found murdered. In this episode, Bauer and Coho are examining crime scene photos from Marcia Hooper's murder scene and notice an apparent delivery from a florist, but the flowers are wrapped in newspaper and look like they're from someone's private garden, which gets Coho thinking about Lincoln Meyer. Quick sketch here, we'd earlier been introduced to David Dean Bottrell as the deliciously creepy Lincoln Meyer, apparently a peeping Tom, or as he puts it, a pee-pee. I'll know more or recall more once I re-encounter New Kids on the Block, 2 episodes back where he is introduced. Earlier, Meyer had implicated their client, Scott, in his affair with Marcia, called him the boy, and put him at the scene. Coho confronts Meyer at his house, in his kitchen, where he's actually arranging the very type of flowers they found at the crime scene. Coho pointed to Meyer's infatuation with Marcia, suggested it must have stung when she called him out in a public document as a sick, psychologically disturbed individual. Meyer bristles at the tenor of this remark, gripping his shears tightly, and demands to know what he is suggesting. You mean to imply that I killed her? I loved her. I cherished her. You are not welcome in my home anymore. You and your inappropriate tenor. I posted my reaction to this exchange on Twitter and got a response from Bottrell himself. Wow, thank you, TJ VideoFuzzy. That was a great episode, and there's no actor more fun to work with than Craig Bierko. If you'd like to read a little more about my experience on Boston Legal, there's a whole chapter about it in my new book. I tracked it down, and that's David Dean Bottrell's working actor, breaking in, making a living, and making a life in the fabulous trenches of show business, available everywhere. I'm already a few chapters into it. It's a fun and breezy read, lots of personal history and insights, and let me tell you, it's even more fun if you read it in Lincoln Meyer's distinctive voice. Ooh, sorry, gotta recover a little bit from all that name-dropping and mention the second standout scene in this episode, which I'm certain the writers were chomping at the bit to put together the second they confirmed Armin Shimmerman to play Judge Brian Hooper. Through what they orchestrated as a casual strategy session pass-through by Renee Auberjonois as Crane, Poole, and Schmidt senior partner Paul Lewiston, the lawyers send him to Hooper's chambers to elicit follow-up leads. This put Shimmerman and Auberjonois in the same set and soundstage together for what appears to be the first time since Star Trek Deep Space Nine ended in 1999. Both appeared in Judging Amy, but not in the same episodes. They both did voice work on something called Geppetto's Secret in 2005, and as a side note, Auberjonois actually appeared in The Practice, Boston Legal's parent production, playing someone else entirely, so that's kind of a Harry Morgan Colonel Potter move there. But it doesn't look like they physically shared a scene before, well, potentially Boston Legal's 3rd season premiere, Can't We All Get Along, but yeah, this would have been one of their first appearances together since playing Quark and Odo on Deep Space Nine, and I had a geekgasm. Hell, had William Shatner as Captain Kirk, Denny Crane walked into the scene, I think the Trekverse might actually have imploded. Finally, this episode featured Curtis Armstrong as Dr. Zachary Simon. I have loved Armstrong in everything I've seen him in, starting with Mr. Pesto's Innamorato in Moonlighting. He was in Murphy Brown with Candice Bergen as Elliot. He appeared with Sybil Shepherd again in Sybil. He appeared in Felicity, Third Rock from the Sun, Ally McBeal. He, along with Armin Shimmerman, and going through the cast list, damn near everyone I've ever heard of were in Crossing Jordan, though not together. Armstrong was in The Chronicle, which I loved, along with Grey's Anatomy, Reaper, Psych, The Riches, My Name is Earl. He was in House. He was in Stuff My Dad Says with William Shatner. He was in Bones, The Closer, Hot in Cleveland. I mean, the man has been in everything, and it was cool to watch him here presenting this deeply flawed expert witness. And over the course of the production, we also caught brief flashes of Betty White. We saw Katie Sagal very briefly, and as I noted earlier, we got to witness Alan Shore wrestle Denny Crane for Shirley's affections. So, as you can see, the significance of this episode wasn't so much the episode itself, but the tons of cross-connections I encountered in it.
What I've been watching.
Another reason the Boston Legal episode stood out as a good potential for my Friday night feature was a few weeks ago I was clicking around and discovered my DVR had stopped on Alter Ego, an episode of The Blacklist. If I ever saw an episode of The Blacklist before now, it was by accident. The show premiered well after I'd ceased doing my TV column at the Minot Daily News. I'd been living in Bismarck for fully a year at that point, and I was aware of it, but it did not look like the kind of show I'd be interested in. Well, then I see that the thing is still on somehow. I go, what the hell? Shrug, press rewind, and watch it from the beginning. I feel like my instincts were borne out. James Spader plays this criminal mastermind, Raymond Red Reddington, who, this isn't the right word, but assists Megan Boone as FBI profiler Elizabeth Keene. She's the only one he'll talk to, and his intel helps put away former associates. Fast forward 5 seasons, and he's still deeply ensconced as this FBI informant, pulling strings and manipulating events from his jail cell, where he is now also engaged in his own defense. The latest development is a handgun he'd been carrying at the time of his arrest and the anonymous tip that implicated him. He moves the evidence be kicked, declared inadmissible, the fix was in. The officer, as he describes him, a marshmallow masquerading as a patrolman, had violated his rights in making the arrest in the first place. The judge, on hearing the recording of the anonymous tip, however, ultimately allows it, so Red's focus is now on finding out who made the anonymous tip. Part of the control he's exerting involves a company and its board of directors whose voting behavior he's seeking to control, and one of those directors, Von Ness, is murdered by an heir to his estate. A lot of the business of this episode is taken up with the title enterprise Alter Ego, where actors present clients with believable experiences, like they'll pose as your fiancé if you're gay and closeted and bowing to family pressures, or your long-lost family members if you're suddenly the heir to a fortune. This part of the story made little sense. The murdered board member had an illegitimate trailer park heir, and Alter Ego had sent actors to pretend they were his extended relations or some dumb thing. Honestly, the upshot is they try to kill him, and he survives and agrees to vote like his father had planned to. How is this a show? Padding out the episode, Red's FBI contact has coworkers who are mired in the most banal workplace romance. Ooh, maybe I can get her to add me on Wordsmith or WordBridge or Words with Acquaintances or something. And another one, a straight-up hottie, is seeking an alter ego date to a friend's wedding because he couldn't possibly just walk outside and get a date literally with anyone. And again, 5 seasons in, what even is this? What it appears to be is an excuse to get James Spader, the only interesting person in the cast, to talk clever lawyer talk, and maybe the whole thing is interesting if you saw everything that happened up till now, but not based on what I saw, no.
Diving into the classic collection.
So anyway, that was James Spader reprising his role as Alan Shore in The Blacklist, which I will not be adding to my regular viewing lineup. Change my mind. On second thought, don't bother. I had a lot of fun material show up in this set of classic VHS to DVD transfers, including a couple more beloved Monty Python sketches like the All England Proust Summarizing Contest and Biggles Dictates a Letter, another episode of Fear Itself, excellent installments of The Shield, In Plain Sight, and an especially good Doctor Who, the Season 4 Agatha Christie adventure, The Unicorn and the Wasp, stuffed to the rafters full of references, sci-fi takes on storyline tropes, and, oh hell yeah, Easter egg inclusions of Agatha Christie mystery titles. Seriously, a huge amount of fun. Then I also found this minute or so scrap of something called Help Me, Help You, where Ted Danson, of all people, is leading a group therapy session that, from what little I saw of it, included Jim Rash and Jer Burns. Fun. Now, over 3 decades of recording shows to VHS tapes, I recorded many shows to be viewed later, which means I also recorded a good number of commercials. So, while I'm cataloging the DVDs I transferred them to, I see them sometimes. Like, in my Season 3 episode, Veronica Mars, my Big Fat Greek Rush Week, I found commercials with Robin Williams in Man of the Year and for Anna Nicole Smith's reality show, and that just... Okay, mostly the only association here is that they're now no longer with us, but it did put them in my thoughts. Speaking of commercials, Slash, for realsies, from Guns N' Roses, made an appearance in a commercial for Volkswagen. I saw Daily Show correspondent John Hodgman in one of those I'm a PC, I'm a Mac commercials, and years before he would appear strapped to the hood of a serial killer's deathmobile as a wrong place, wrong time hostage/torture toy, as of a recent episode of Deadly Class on Syfy, Brian freaking Posehn appeared as a customer in a Staples commercial. More on that later.
Current collection.
I thought I must have missed something in the first season finale of A Million Little Things, so I pulled it up again last night and watched it again with my notes open. And in a show that I've felt since it was recommended to me was constantly hinting at some big reveal, well, I remember it like it was only episode 43. I'm really hoping we get back into the John Dixon suicide mystery storyline soon. These personality blow-ups with Gary are not good use of time, energy, or craft. Yeah, file that one under careful what you wish for, huh? In the season finale of A Million Little Things, okay, what? I'm sorry, what? You're going to tie Ron Livingston as God in his universe, paterfamilias John Dixon's suicide, somehow to survivor guilt he felt for losing his college roommate Dave on September 11th. John was a guy who lived his life huge, balls-out real estate guy, risk-taker, conquistador, who'd put his life and his losses in perspective, hell, better than anyone. And in that final scene, when Barbara Morgan's son, Parker, sees the video John put together before he threw himself off a balcony, no, that's not it. There's no good reason for that child to... Well, first off, there was no good reason for him to be watching it anyway. That was clearly addressed to his mother. This would be like reading someone else's mail. It's really not that character in what small way he's been introduced to us. But no, there's no good reason for that child to receive nothing, no contact, no anything for 17 years, and then a video on a jump drive and presumably some of the money John left to his mother. This was the kid who was Deus Ex Machina reading Rome's screenplay at the hospital. Parker, currently in counseling with Maggie for, well, probably abandonment issues with Mitch, his adopted firefighter father, and wow, was he a tough read, all but slamming the door in Delilah's face. All she wants to know is who is this Barbara woman her late husband left a quarter of his estate to, and it's such a big, huge secret. I dated his roommate in college. Well, there's a reason. As far as we know, there was nothing untoward about John's relationship with Barbara, Parker's mother, even if it turns out, as it so often does on TV dramas, that Parker is actually John's kid and not Dave's, which would at least add to his guilt. But John didn't even meet Delilah until after Babs hooked up with Mitch, so what the hell was I watching? Long-delayed aftershocks from the last point of unifying emotional solidarity we can point to as Americans, and his grief and guilt that he felt responsible for his college roommate's death. He'd convinced Dave to come with him for a real estate conference John had to go to while in college near the beginning of the term, which Dave got on the flight while John was screwing around getting a bottle of wine that he couldn't possibly have gotten when they landed. He didn't get on that plane on September 11th, and 17 years later, when he found out his wife was cheating on him with his best friend, enters the darkest place and put this video message together for Barbara. Well, obviously he couldn't talk to Delilah. Well, he should have. Maybe not talking to her led to her hookup with Eddie in the first place. Or maybe she was sensing some distance or the emotional connection between John and Ashley. At any rate, clearly there was no talking of any sort anymore, so when she turned up with an oopsie baby, he spun out. Didn't talk to Gary, who, yeah, is pretty self-involved and all over the place most of the time. Didn't talk to Rome, whose life was pretty much ordinary until it wasn't. No, sitting in front of a webcam, telling Barbara he's sorry he ever said... John had some opinion about her getting engaged to Mitch a few weeks after Dave's funeral, and I guess I do too, but 17 years later they're still together and seem to have made it work. She didn't seem to be blaming him for Dave's death. Hell, John is sitting there accusing the woman pregnant with probably Dave's child of pretending he never existed. Look, I know, because I do, that the weeks and months following 9/11 were emotional times for everyone, especially people directly connected, but this story is all over the place. In the video, he says that he can never forgive himself for what he said to her. Well, dude, she's just over there. I mean, everyone you've ever met has gone and talked to her so much Mitch is sick of it. Why not just tell her? As he says in his video to Barbara, when you told me to find something to live for, I did. But then my wife grew bored with me, or I did with her, and my 2, maybe 3 fantastic kids, and my biggest, baddest real estate deal in the history of history isn't doing it for me anymore. I has a sad, I jump off a building now. Goodbye! Never told anyone, never sought any help, just lived his life big, forged strong, solid connections with new friends. 17 more years of amazing experiences, helped one of them beat cancer. I am not buying this. That otherwise, no note, left his family and friends just lost in trying to piece together what happened in the wake of ancient history that has spun out and had so many implications for so many people. Eddie and Delilah are pretending her baby is John's at the same time Eddie is seeking to reconcile with Catherine. I'm watching this play out, and on top of everything else, I'm not even really enjoying this anymore. Even with, probably especially with this latest revelation. After her meeting with Barbara, Delilah meets up with Maggie and Gary, tells them the whole story, and Gary notices that he's not satisfied. Thought if he knew what triggered John's suicide, turned over that one stone that explained everything, that he would understand, and he doesn't. Therapist Maggie notes that it's never one stone, it's a whole bunch of stones all stacked up on each other. People are complete mysteries, circle of jerks, etc., etc., etc. I mean, it's all so soaked and smeared and bound up in about a lifetime's supply of schmaltz. Everyone's got cancer. Everyone's, thank God, in remission. We're all opening our restaurants. We're getting rave reviews. 2 weeks in, we're declaring them such a success. We're buying sports cars for our husbands. We're getting a divorce in the wake of the emotional attachments and betrayal we felt for years. But, oh, in one pleasant conversation and one afternoon of reconnection, we're rekindling our feelings for each other. We both signed divorce papers, but oh, wait, you didn't file them? Let's stay married. Oh, how happy we suddenly are. Never mind, someone else is having your kid. We're coming out of the closet when we're 12, and our whole circle of family and friends is okay with that. And what an unexpected relief. And then, hard close to the finale here, Rome wants a kid and Gina. There, I said her name finally. Sorry, she's great. There's so damn many people in this show. Gina doesn't, and she's being practical and honest. She doesn't want to raise a kid, but he doesn't want to accept that. Probably something they can talk about more not in the hallway outside Delilah's maternity ward. And speaking of, as the screen goes black, Eddie meets up with Catherine to share some important information about Delilah's baby. What a cliffhanger. Well, I do suspect I would enjoy this show somewhat more if I'd seen the first 3 episodes. For sure, I'd have a little more insight into these characters and how they pull us into the story in the first place. But guys, if the last 14 I've watched can't make up for that, that's a problem. Well, it's not mine anymore. A million little things, God love you. I love everyone in you. May you run 1,000 years, but no, sorry. For my part, I'm out. In other viewing, the, I hope, first season of I Am the Night on TNT closed out with high adventure when India Isley as Fauna Hodel, the estranged granddaughter of Dr. George Hodel of L.A., seeks out her grandmother, Corinna, and ends up drugged and abducted by George, suspected in the murder of Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, found murdered, surgically mutilated, and arranged in 1947 in Los Angeles. This behavior in part mirrors the surrealist artwork he admires and collects and outlandish mid-1960s happenings he hosts in his home, the main hall lined with harlequins presenting corridors leading to a centerpiece event featuring Corinna lying on a bench in a purple gown. A pair of scissors is passed among partygoers who take snips of her dress until the scissors are handed to Fauna and she doesn't want to participate and she runs off, making her way to what looks like a disused underground vault where she is set upon by Ivanovich Victor Sepp, also known as Icarus, a homicidal artist protege of Dr. Hodel. Icarus attacks Fauna, she stabs him with the scissors, and Chris Pine, as shell-shocked alcoholic photojournalist/paparazzo Jay Singletary, shoots him. They are discovered, but the drunken interlopers think the dead body is just part of the happening, and Fauna and Jay cart him out through the front door in a wheelbarrow like he's art. They dump his body at a quarry Fauna knows her grandfather has used to dump bodies before. While at the house, Fauna finds an address for her birth mother, Tamar. She convinces Jay to fly her to Hawaii to track her down. Jay gets tickets from its editor, promising a huge story. Assuming the worst, Fauna's adopted family raises a huge stink about the arrangement, but they take off and eventually encounter Tamar in Hawaii. We don't get a lot of interaction between Tamar and Fauna, though according to the semi-affiliated podcast Root of Evil, an independent project put together by Fauna's daughters Rasha and Yvette, with tapes and interviews of family members post their great-grandfather Dr. Hodell's death at the age of 91, she'd stayed there for a week. The interaction I Am the Night focused on was Jay's interaction with Tamar, mainly as a means of tying her father, Dr. Hodell, to the unsolved Black Dahlia murder. Tamar showed him a collection of 6 portraits in oils Dr. Hodell had sent her, and Jay recognized a couple of them instantly as victims of unsolved murders, particularly Elizabeth Short. While Fauna was in Hawaii, Dr. Hodell paid a visit to Fauna's adoptive mother, Jemmy Lee, in Nevada. Though it breaks her heart, she tells Fauna to stay in Hawaii and never contact her again, in an attempt to keep Fauna safe from her murderous grandfather. Dr. Hodell stabs Jemmy Lee and makes his way back to L.A. Jay's editor arranges to meet with Jay after hours in a seedy part of town torn apart by race riots, and Jay is arrested and tortured by the police. Jay says he's got proof. His inquisitor, Billis, tells him it doesn't matter. Dr. Hodell is protected. Jay says set him free and he'll kill Hodell and take the fall for a different unsolved murder. They arrange for him to get loose in the confusion of the race riots and confront Hodell. Meanwhile, Fauna has come to in Dr. Hodell's home. He has arranged a feast laced with sleeping pills, which she refuses, so he takes her to his basement studio, which, if his parties reminded me of Eyes Wide Shut, his studio reminds me of Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. He smacks her face and tells her to change into a flimsy nightie. While changing, she slips a paperweight into a sock to use as a weapon, a move she learned from Jay while in Hawaii. He sits her down and begins painting her portrait, which we can assume is the origin of those paintings Tamar has. She lashes out, knocks him down, and runs upstairs where she finds Jay breaking in. They go back downstairs and he has run out the back way. They're free now, but the unsolved murder of what appears to be at least half a dozen women looms as a backdrop to a city under siege. The series can't really resolve anything. According to the Root of Evil podcast, Dr. George Hodell reportedly died peacefully at the end of his long and cruel life, fancying himself an avant-garde artiste of some sort, while allegedly perpetrating foul and bizarre abuses against his wives and mistresses, his daughters and grandchildren, along with the many repercussions and implications that arose from those abuses. After his death, investigations conducted by his nephew Steve Hodell, a retired detective with the LAPD, investigations initially meant to rule him out, uncovered handwriting samples from the Black Dahlia killer any jury would have found compelling. The podcast continues past the events depicted in the series and is extraordinarily well put together, if incredibly dark. As we hear from people in Dr. Hodell's life, including a few found recordings made by Fauna Hodell and Tamar Hodell and her children, as the cycle of multi-generational abuse is explored beyond this series, there is clearly more story to tell, and I'd love to see I Am the Night come back for a second season at least. Well done, if chilling production, everyone. Let's see what else. I added the pilot episode of Parks and Rec. It'll be fun to bring that in from the beginning. I had comments on Deadly Class and The Magicians as well, but they're weeks out of date at this point. Mainly in Deadly Class, I wanted to highlight a character I can't name in this production, a bestial serial killer. I'll call him Funface. You'll be able to figure that out. Began his life as Chester, Marcus's roommate in the abusive Venezuelan sweatshop orphanage he escaped from, messing his face up in the fiery explosion. Funface is now holding Chico's severed head as evidence implicating Marcus in his death. Chester's a serial killer now, Marcus says. I've got to kill him. For his part, Chico's got way more lines now that he's a severed head, Funface's confessor and sounding board. Truly enjoying this twisted, wackadoo series. And as of this week, I completed my second binder in my current collection. I've been working on this one since March of last year, so oddly enough I seem to be keeping pace with my classic collection. Well, it really depends on what's on and how much I really want to archive, but I've added 110 discs the past year at about 6 hours each, so clearly I've been finding stuff to watch. Cross Connection. I enjoyed Brian Posehn's appearance as Funface's torture toy in Deadly Class, as well as that Staples commercial I mentioned earlier. Also appearing in that episode was French Stewart as the serial killer Scorpio. Fun to see him in this. Stewart is better known to me as one of John Lithgow's alien colleagues in Third Rock from the Sun. And in the last episode of The Magicians I saw, Cameron Manheim appeared as Sheila, a landlord in Modesto, where Alice goes to escape magic. As it happens, Sheila is a powerful queromancer, a finder of lost things, and she opens an illicit tap of magic, loosing some chaos in the neighborhood. Manheim appeared most recently in my collection in the pilot episode of Living Biblically and in my series recording of The Practice, both of which I talked about in episode 22. Referencing my Studio 6 Feet Under project, she appeared in The Practice with Dylan McDermott to Francis Conroy in American Horror Story, Point Goes to 6 Feet Under.
Taking care of some old business.
1,000 years ago, well, a bit more recently, but not by much, I'd mentioned back in episode 13 where I wanted to craft a homemade DVD set of Trial and Error. I recently devoted a good chunk of weekend transferring broadcast recordings to a set of 2 DVDs, 1 season per disc. I'm glad I did, too. In the wake of recent announcements, we will not be seeing a 3rd season of this quirky little show. I pulled in episodes from where I'd saved them throughout my disc set and was newly entertained by the madcap hijinks in West Peck, North Carolina, North Peck, East Carolina, South Peck, West Carolina. Sorry, East Peck, South Carolina. I confirmed suspicions from watching the lady laws detailed in Season 2, one of which, a flag boy needs to run ahead of any vehicle being driven by a woman in East Peck, warning other motorists, "Lady driver!" When Nicholas D'Agosto as defense attorney Josh Siegel, well, Sherry Shepard as his assistant, Anne Flatch, was driving him somewhere in Season 1. She did not have a flag boy, but to be fair, in Season 1 they hadn't yet thought of this joke. There was wild funny throughout this production, tracking different murder trials and investigations in a small southern town, fish-out-of-water hilarity when D'Agosto as a New York attorney defends a few very difficult clients, including, in Season 1, John Lithgow as a sexually fluid poet and accused wife killer Larry Henderson, and Kristen Chenoweth as Lavinia Peck Foster, East Peck's most beloved citizen, negotiates tricky interpersonal connections, including Jayma Mays as Carol Ann Keene, a boundary-free prosecuting attorney, and Patricia Belcher and Joel McCrary as the bizarrely named judges Hazendeich, the N is silent, and Alexander Campbelltoe. They just don't hear it. And assisted, to stretch that word unrecognizably, by Shepard I mentioned up there as Anne Flatch, a walking WebMD directory of rare and frankly troubling ailments. She has conditions where she occasionally walks backwards, or faints when she sees beautiful art, or blepharospasm, where she can't open her eyes sometimes, and occasionally falls asleep with her eyes open. And then there's Stephen Boyer as Dwayne Reed, the sometimes colleague, sometimes East Peck peace officer, occasional suicide theory debunker, remote farm evidence not procurer, and unwitting rum hole, water hazard forearm, and dead body discoverer, leading his colleague Anne, who also has face blindness and can't recognize faces, to exhibit her jumping Frenchman from Maine malady, where, upon being startled, she may launch herself several feet into the air. It's actually quite common, she says, if you're a Frenchman, and you're from Maine. And there were a few jokes we could anticipate further exploration in a 3rd season had we gotten one. The closing moments of Season 2 referenced a potential witch trial. Huge amount of potential funny in that, particularly in the hands of these writers who incidentally started referencing witch trials back in Season 1. In fact, there was one point in which I actually managed to improve my collection. For one thing, in the run-up to Season 2, NBC put all of the Season 1 on demand, so I was able to switch out the home burn I made mention of in episode 13. Another goof came when I recorded the second to the last episode of Season 1. I did so while my DVR was recording the season finale, and at one point, coming back from a commercial, I accidentally recorded a chapter of the live airing finale in and among that playback. The reason the final track was 26 minutes long instead of the usual 21. Well, for sure something had seemed out of place in the playback, and upon rewatching it, I easily identified the misplaced material and re-recorded clean copies of the final 2 episodes of Season 1. Anyway, watching Lithgow and Chenoweth bring the funny so consistently in this production and the consistently amazing work of this hilarious cast, I was so happy I finally just took the time to go through and transfer these shows to a single disc set. In fact, so motivated was I in this effort that I kept a second promise to myself and put together a homemade DVD set of the 2nd season of Legion. We'll probably need a little more time with this one. Settle in a spell. A huge part of the reason I wanted to take on this project was consistency. I'd crafted a disc set of Season 1 and I wanted to put Season 2 next to it. Also, it gave me a chance to re-watch this fascinating and much maligned project, including by me, and I wanted to double-check that, given how much I otherwise loved this show. I needed to understand what was going on in this season. It's never 100% clear what's happening. There's a lot of art and subtext and perception and perspectives to contend with. I never read the comics, so this is my only experience with this particular creation, though this storyline is woven alongside the X-Men universe. There are also moral absolutes, and I'll get to those, but I needed to re-experience this production, which ran on FX from April through June of last year. Ostensibly on Legion, David Haller, the estranged son of Dr. Charles Xavier, is, for the first time in his life, free of the parasite Shadow King Farouk, but experienced up until this point as a hallucination or a motive force, spent the first season terrorizing him and seeking to hide or fight or otherwise preserve itself. Farouk jumped to the powerful but recently reanimated telepath Oliver, beloved erstwhile comatose husband of Dr. Melanie Bird, who, with her Summerland Padawans, Tanami, Carrie, and Sid, had rescued or abducted David from where Clark was interrogating him in Division 3, and David and Sid, a body-swapping mutant, developed feelings for one another. Then, once David was freed from Farouk and just as suddenly imprisoned in a strange orb, Melanie and her team are incorporated into Division 3, headed by Admiral Fukuyama, a cyborg and security analyst recruited and modified by Division leadership to be the keeper of its secrets and operating as the machine that bleeds, who communicates through mustachioed androidettes called Vermilion. David is abducted by an orb that, as the production and investigation continues, Carrie believes he himself is probably responsible for, but crafted sometime in the future and sent back in time. Farouk possesses Oliver now, but is looking for his own body, killed 30 years before and hidden in a monastery. Oliver is still his physical presence, but Lenny, a woman David met in the asylum, helps represent Farouk's possession. Lenny was one of the masks employed by Farouk in David's head, now transferred to Oliver. Oh, this is complicated. Farouk is looking for his body, and, fully aware of the connection between Sid and David, crafts a future vision of Sid who instructs David to help Farouk, who, we discover, is just as manipulated by Farouk as anyone else in his thrall. In the wake of Oliver's waking up and deserting her, Melanie disappears into a cloud of blue, a psychoactive drug that potentially opens her further to Farouk's influence, and she comes not only to attack Clark, but brainwash Sid into believing the worst about David. Everything that happens in Division 3 is directed by Farouk. The monk infecting people and trapping them in their own heads is the last surviving member of a monastery housing Farouk's body, otherwise swept by appalling and fatal psychological distress. Sending David on a wild goose chase, Oliver and Lenny infiltrate Division 3 and steal a powerful genetic recoder used later to transform David's sister Amy into a physical vessel for Lenny, rightly dismissed by Sid as a distraction to mess David up, but immediately thereafter can't recognize that Melanie's revelations about her love, David, are blatant manipulations. He's not a good guy, he's a bad guy, he enjoys torturing people, in a minute he's gonna mind rape you, on and on and on. But the whole season, all of 2 seasons really, Sid has been in love with David, who has demonstrated in so many ways that he is in love with her. He was that night, the very night before David is to face off with Farouk. Sid goes to him, risks her life to be with him, to help him. This is after a couple of redirect episodes demonstrating David's commitment to Sid, as well as his love for his sister. So, same as the logic we get in 24, yeah, we're friends, but if I need to drill a few holes in Oliver's thighs to find out where Farouk is, I'm sorry, but we're on a clock here. I will sound like I'm forgiving him here. After David pounds the crap out of Farouk, he shortcut renormalized his relationship with Sydney, and yeah, after Farouk is in custody, he projects himself astrally and has mind-controlled sex with Sydney, establishing the whole episode ever since he first saw Sydney. He is suffering under the delusion that he is a good person deserving of love, when this dick incel move demonstrates he is not, but flip that. Melanie spent the whole episode complaining about men, the power they have, not saying out loud, what power do women have? In Melanie's case, the power to restore a fighty Minotaur and resurrect Farouk's body. It seems that, ironically enough, what David needs Sydney for is moral certainty, direction, and guidance, the sense of right and wrong with what he has to do. On his own, he reaches out, mind wipes her anger and distance, willows her terror, and just leapfrogs that anger to rapprochement and intimacy, blocking her recent memories of him and essentially raping her to restore his own power. The reason that David is a bad guy, a rapist, as Sydney asserts the following day, potentially along with everyone else in that room under Farouk's influence, but it stands, a rapist who drugged her and raped her, manipulating her memories so she wouldn't raise any objection. A lot is going on in this trial, but the reason why David is a bad guy, while we've all more or less forgiven Willow for doing the exact same thing in Season 6 of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer series, is that Willow expressed remorse, regret, and shame, and David, in all his internal dialogue, no part of that seems to accept blame or remorse. Can we give him a minute, though? What he needs from Sydney, what has been taken away from him by the Shadow King, is that sense of stability and strength, which, just one night earlier, was freely given and his to rely upon. Sid's been influenced by Farouk, by Farouk's manipulation of Melanie, by Farouk's manipulation of Sid's future self to hate David, which only benefits, ta-da, Farouk. I'm not saying rape is okay if you need it to save the world. Honestly, if you feel that she'll probably one day get there on her own, and even if she won't, there's trust and ties you need to rebuild, and you'll do that faster if you haven't effing raped her in the meantime, and in that meantime find some other source of strength. But we've already established that no, he is not a good person. Well, what was our first clue outside the title of the show based on a morally ambiguous anti-hero who is taking on vast world-killing forces over which we might prefer he prevail? This character psychologically attacks a loved one and a colleague, skips over some vitally important steps, shortcuts of which Machiavelli might approve, but we can't. But okay, is that a reason to hate this show? I've spent 10 minutes discussing the ethical underpinnings of a character I only know from this work. Is it a bad show? Is it, as one fellow podcaster recently asserted, one of the 5 worst shows in 2018 because a central character is flawed? I respectfully disagree. Legion establishes a morally ambiguous universe of flawed characters facing overwhelming obstacles and lesser of two evils types of decision-making. It examines the role of volition, power, corruption, lies. Farouk said as soon as he was back in his own body he would go away, not bother anyone. But the very first thing he does in Season 2 is infiltrate Division 3, kill a bunch of guards, and steal a machine more or less designed specifically to mess with David. There was no other reason to steal the genetic recoder than to target Amy, give her skin suit to Lenny, and throw David completely for a loop, which, incidentally, I assumed was the reason he stopped to grab Lenny on his way out of Division 3. He can sense Amy is still in there somewhere, and he wants to save her. Farouk's in his own body, there's no unringing that bell, and the best means they had of containing that particular nuke failed, so maybe David can at least save his sister. Personally, I have loved this show throughout. I wasn't sufficiently troubled by David's actions in the second season finale, and I acknowledge that on redirect, but I still feel this was some amazing storytelling, compelling, stuff I'm not running into a lot, presented really well by people who know how to spin a yarn. FX announced Season 3 air dates for this fall, and I will absolutely be watching.
Upcoming shows.
There's a pretty good chance I will not get another episode out for a while, so I wanted to mention the second season of Happy, starring Chris Meloni and Patton Oswalt, will premiere March 27th on Syfy. Very much looking forward to this. Beyond that, thanks for checking in on my video cataloging project. You can check out my catalog listing along with audio links at VideoFuzzy.blogspot.com and past episodes at Apple Podcasts and iTunes. Feedback is always appreciated. You can contact me through my blog or podcast sites or through my VideoFuzzy page on Facebook, or you can follow me at TJ VideoFuzzy on Twitter. For VideoFuzzy, I'm Terry J. Aman. Happy viewing.
It might be amazing, it might just be scuzzy. We'll find out together on VideoFuzzy.